Marcus Reed's hands were covered in blood the night he tried to save a billionaire's life on a frozen Manhattan sidewalk. But it wasn't the first time he'd fought death and lost. While hundreds of people stood filming with their phones, not one of them dropped to their knees. Not one of them remembered that a human being was dying right in front of them. Marcus did. He'd failed to save his wife 3 years ago. He wasn't going to fail again. What he didn't know was that this one moment of compassion would shatter every wall he'd built around his broken heart and change his daughter's life forever. Before we begin, I want to invite you to join me on this journey. If this story moves you, please hit that like button and comment below with the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story reaches across the world. Now, let's begin. The cold bit through Marcus Reed's jacket like 1,000 tiny knives as he hurried down Fifth Avenue, his breath misting in the frigid February air. His shift at the warehouse had run late again, overtime they'd promised to pay but probably wouldn't, and now he was running behind for his second job. More importantly, he was late getting home to Ava, his daughter, his reason for everything. Marcus checked his phone as he walked, his worn sneakers slapping against the salted pavement. 8:47 p.m. Mrs. Chen from 4B was watching Ava, bless her heart, but the elderly woman had her own health issues. Marcus hated asking for help, hated feeling like a burden, hated that his 8-year-old daughter spent so many evenings waiting for a father who was always exhausted, always rushing, always one emergency away from falling apart completely. 3 years. It had been 3 years since Teresa died, and sometimes it felt like 3 lifetimes. Other times, it felt like yesterday. He pushed the memory away, focusing instead on putting one foot in front of the other. The street was crowded despite the cold. Manhattan never truly slept, never truly emptied. Designer shopping bags swung from manicured hands. Couples laughed over expensive cocktails visible through restaurant windows. The city pulsed with wealth and possibility, none of which seemed meant for people like Marcus. He was just another invisible man in a city full of them. That's when he heard the commotion ahead. At first, it was just raised voices, the kind of urban soundtrack that usually meant nothing, an argument, a street performer, someone's car alarm. But something in the tone made Marcus slow his pace, made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Someone call 911. Oh my God, is she breathing? Get back, give her space. Marcus's heart kicked into overdrive before his mind fully processed what was happening. His feet were already moving faster, carrying him toward the growing crowd on the sidewalk. He pushed through the outer ring of onlookers, his height giving him a view over most of their heads. A woman lay on the concrete, her body frighteningly still. She was dressed in what Marcus recognized as expensive clothing, a tailored wool coat, designer shoes, the kind of outfit that cost more than his monthly rent. Her dark hair was spread around her head like a halo, her face pale as fresh snow. She wasn't moving, wasn't breathing, and nobody was helping her. Marcus stared in disbelief at the crowd. There had to be 40-50 people gathered now, forming a perfect circle around the fallen woman. Phones were out, cameras recording, but not a single person had dropped to their knees. Not one of them was doing anything but watching. Has anyone called an ambulance? Marcus's voice came out rougher than he intended, sharp with urgency. Yeah, someone called, a man in a business suit replied without looking away from his phone screen, where he appeared to be live streaming the scene. Is anyone performing CPR? Marcus pushed closer, his chest tightening. Silence. Uncomfortable shuffling. A woman in a fur coat actually stepped back, as if afraid he might ask her specifically. Does anyone here know CPR? Marcus tried again, looking around at the sea of blank faces, some concerned, most just curious, all of them frozen in that peculiar modern paralysis where documentation seemed more important than action. Nothing. No one. Marcus's hands started shaking, his vision narrowed. Suddenly he wasn't on Fifth Avenue anymore. He was in his apartment, 3 years ago, watching Teresa collapse in the kitchen, calling 911 with trembling fingers while he tried to remember the CPR training he'd taken years before. Pressing on her chest, counting compressions, breathing into her mouth, begging her to come back while Ava cried in her bedroom down the hall. He'd failed that night, failed to save the woman he loved, failed to keep his daughter's mother alive. Move! The word came out of Marcus like a command, like something separate from his conscious thought. People scattered as he dropped to his knees beside the woman. his work bag hitting the ground with a thud. His hands found her neck, searching for a pulse. Nothing. Her skin was cool to the touch, but not yet cold. Her chest wasn't rising. Every second counted. "Ma'am? Ma'am, can you hear me?" Marcus's training came flooding back, muscle memory taking over where panic threatened to freeze him. He tilted her head back gently, checked her airway, positioned his hands on her sternum. Someone behind him gasped. Is he allowed to touch her? What if he's not certified? Oh God, what if he makes it worse? Marcus blocked them out, all of them. The phones, the whispers, the city itself, it all faded away until there was nothing but this moment, this woman, this chance to save a life. He began compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. He counted under his breath, pushing down hard and fast the way he'd been taught. 30 compressions, then 2 rescue breaths. The woman's body jerked with each push, but Marcus kept his rhythm steady, kept his focus absolute. Teresa's face flashed behind his eyes, her last moments, the helplessness that had nearly destroyed him. "Come on," Marcus muttered, increasing the pace slightly. "Come on, stay with me." More people were gathering now, the crowd swelling to nearly 100. Marcus was vaguely aware of someone shouting that the ambulance was 5 minutes away, but 5 minutes might as well have been an eternity. 5 minutes was too long. "Breathe," he commanded, tilting her head back again, pinching her nose, breathing into her mouth. Once. Twice. Back to compressions. His shoulders were starting to burn. Sweat dripped down his temple despite the freezing temperature. He'd been at this for how long? A minute? 2? Time had become elastic, meaningless. "Sir, maybe you should stop," a voice suggested nervously. "The professionals are almost here." "Not yet," Marcus ground out through clenched teeth. "Not yet." Because he knew with the certainty of someone who'd lived through the alternative, that every second mattered, that the difference between life and death could be measured in heartbeats and breath, that giving up, even for a moment, could mean losing her forever, and he would not, could not, fail again. 38, 39, 40. He'd lost count. Started over, kept pushing. The woman's designer coat had fallen open, revealing a silk blouse, a string of pearls worth more than Marcus's car. She looked like someone important, someone powerful, someone whose life mattered to a lot of people. But in this moment, none of that registered. She was just another human being fighting for breath, just another soul balanced on the knife's edge between life and death. "Please," Marcus whispered, not even sure if he was talking to the woman or to some higher power he'd stopped believing in when Teresa died. "Please don't go. Not like this. Not alone on a sidewalk while people just watch." He gave her 2 more rescue breaths, positioned his hands, pushed down, and she gasped. The sound was wet, horrible, beautiful. Her body convulsed as her lungs dragged in air. Her eyes flew open, unfocused and terrified, her hand shooting up to grab Marcus's sleeve with surprising strength. "Easy, easy," Marcus soothed, his own heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. "You're okay. You're breathing. Help is coming." The crowd erupted in applause and excited chatter, but Marcus barely heard them. He was focused entirely on the woman, watching her chest rise and fall, counting each precious breath. Her eyes found his face, wide with confusion and fear and something else. Recognition, maybe. Or gratitude. Or just the primal relief of someone who'd glimpsed the other side and made it back. "What?" Her voice was barely a whisper, cracked and raw. "What happened?" "You collapsed," Marcus explained gently, keeping his voice calm even though his hands were still shaking. "Don't try to talk. The ambulance is almost here." As if summoned by his words, the wail of sirens cut through the night. The crowd parted like water as the EMTs rushed through with their equipment, their radios crackling with medical codes Marcus didn't understand. "We've got her, sir," one of them said, already hooking up monitors, checking vitals, moving with practiced efficiency. "Did you perform CPR?" "Yes." Marcus stood on legs that felt like water, backing away to give them room. "She wasn't breathing, no pulse. I did compressions for maybe 2-3 minutes before she came back." "You saved her life," the EMT said, matter-of-factly, wrapping a blood pressure cuff around the woman's arm. Another minute or two, and we'd be looking at serious brain damage, if not worse. The woman's eyes found Marcus again as they lifted her onto the gurney. She tried to speak, reaching out toward him, but the oxygen mask they'd placed over her face muffled her words. "Sir, we'll need your information," another EMT was saying, clipboard in hand. "For the report. Are you family?" "No, Marcus started, then realized he had no idea how to explain what he was. A stranger who happened to be in the right place at the right time. A man running from his own ghosts? "I just helped. I'm nobody." "Well, nobody just performed a miracle," the EMT said with a slight smile. "We still need your name and contact information." Marcus rattled off the basics automatically, his mind elsewhere. He watched as they loaded the woman into the ambulance, her hand still reaching toward where he'd been standing. The doors closed with a hollow thud, and then the ambulance was pulling away, sirens screaming back to life. And just like that, it was over. The crowd began to disperse, already moving on to the next moment, the next distraction. Marcus stood alone on the sidewalk, his coat covered in God knew what, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline crash. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chen. "Ava is asking for you. Everything okay?" Marcus looked at his watch and felt his stomach drop. 9:15. He was supposed to have been home half an hour ago. His second job, a night shift cleaning offices in Midtown, started in 45 minutes, and he still had to get back to the Bronx, check on Ava, change clothes, and somehow get back downtown. He grabbed his work bag and started walking, faster now, his mind racing. The woman would be fine. The hospital would take care of her. She'd probably never think about him again, and that was okay. That was how it should be. He hadn't done it for recognition or reward. He'd done it because no one else would. Because he knew what it felt like to stand by helplessly while someone died. Because he wouldn't be one of the people who just watched. The subway station swallowed him up, and Marcus descended into the harsh fluorescent light and stale air of the underground. The train was delayed, of course. Everything in his life seemed to run on a schedule specifically designed to make things harder. When he finally made it home, 40 minutes later than planned, Mrs. Chen was waiting in the hallway looking worried. "Marcus, Ava said you were supposed to be home an hour ago. Is everything all right?" "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Chen," Marcus said, fumbling for his keys. "There was an emergency. Someone collapsed. I had to help." "Oh my goodness!" The elderly woman's spot flew to her chest. "Are you hurt?" No, I'm fine. The other person is okay too, I think. The ambulance took her." Marcus pushed open the door to his apartment, a cramped two-bedroom that leaked in winter and baked in summer, but was home nonetheless. "Thank you so much for staying late. I know it's an imposition." "Nonsense," Mrs. Chen waved him off, but she did accept the $20 bill he pressed into her hand. He couldn't really afford it, but he also couldn't afford to lose the only reliable childcare he had. "Ava is a delight. She did her homework, ate her dinner. She's watching that cartoon with the singing creatures." "Thank you," Marcus said again, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "Seriously, Mrs. Chen, you're a lifesaver." The irony of the phrase wasn't lost on him. After Mrs. Chen left, Marcus found Ava curled up on the couch, her favorite blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her face lit up when she saw him, but he could see the worry behind her smile. She'd learned too young to be afraid of the moments when her father didn't come home on time. "Daddy!" She launched herself at him, and Marcus caught her, holding her tight despite the exhaustion in his bones. "Hey, baby girl, I'm sorry I'm late." "Mrs. Chen said there was an emergency." Ava pulled back to look at him, her dark eyes, so like her mother's, it sometimes hurt to meet them, searching his face. "Are you okay? You look tired." "I am tired," Marcus admitted, because he'd promised himself after Teresa died that he would never lie to his daughter about the important things. "But I'm okay. Someone got sick on the street, and I had to help them until the ambulance came." "Did you save them?" Ava asked with the straightforward curiosity of childhood. Marcus thought about the woman's eyes opening, about her gasping breath, about the EMT's words. "Yeah, sweetheart. I think maybe I did." "Like a superhero." Ava's face broke into a wide grin, and for a moment the weight on Marcus's shoulders felt a little lighter. "Not quite like a superhero," he corrected gently, setting her back on the couch. "More like someone who knew what to do and did it." That's not superpowers, baby. That's just being human. Mommy would be proud, Ava said quietly, and Marcus had to turn away for a moment, pretending to check the time on the microwave so she wouldn't see the sudden shine in his eyes. Yeah, he managed, his voice rough. Yeah, I think she would be. He had 15 minutes before he had to leave for his second job. Barely enough time to change his shirt, wash his face, and make sure Ava was settled for the night. Mrs. Chen had agreed to sleep on the couch, an arrangement Marcus hated but couldn't afford to refuse. As he moved through the motions of his nightly routine, Marcus tried not to think about the woman from the sidewalk. Tried not to wonder if she was okay, if she had family waiting at the hospital, if she'd wake up tomorrow and remember the stranger who'd brought her back from the edge. It didn't matter. She was from a different world. The kind of world where coats cost thousands of dollars and ambulances came quickly because you had the right zip code. Their paths had crossed for a brief, desperate moment, but now they'd diverge again, the way streams split around a stone. She would go back to her life, whatever that was, and Marcus would go back to his, 2 jobs, 1 daughter, and the constant struggle to keep their heads above water. That was just the way things were. He kissed Ava goodnight, promised Mrs. Chen he'd be back by 6 a.m., and headed out into the cold again. The subway platform was nearly empty at this hour, just a few other night shift workers and a homeless man sleeping on a bench covered in newspapers. Marcus leaned against a pillar and closed his eyes, just for a moment. His hands had finally stopped shaking, but he could still feel the ghost of the woman's pulse returning beneath his fingers, could still hear her desperate gasp for air. He'd saved her, actually saved her. The thought should have felt triumphant, but instead, it just felt heavy. Because saving one person didn't change anything, did it? Tomorrow he'd still wake up exhausted, still work himself to the bone for wages that barely covered rent, still struggle to give Ava the life she deserved. One moment of heroism didn't rewrite the story of your life. The train arrived with a screech of metal on metal, and Marcus boarded, finding a seat in the back corner. Through the scratched window, he watched the city blur past. Lights and darkness, wealth and poverty, all of it mixing together into one endless stream. Somewhere in that stream was a hospital where a woman he'd never see again was recovering, her life saved by a stranger who'd disappeared back into the anonymous masses. And somewhere in that same stream was a little girl sleeping in a tiny apartment, dreaming of a daddy who was always there, even when he was gone, always strong, even when he was breaking, always okay, even when nothing was okay. Marcus closed his eyes and let the rhythm of the train carry him toward another long night of work. He had no way of knowing that the woman whose life he'd saved was already asking for him. No way of knowing that she'd refuse to rest until someone found out who he was. No way of knowing that his desire for anonymity, for a quick return to the safety of invisibility, would prove impossible. No way of knowing that everything, absolutely everything, was about to change. But in that moment, on that train, Marcus Reed was still just another invisible man in an invisible city, carrying weights no one else could see, fighting battles no one else would know about. And that, he thought, was exactly how it should be. The train plunged into the tunnel, and Marcus Reed disappeared into the darkness, unaware that he'd just planted the seeds of a transformation that would reshape not just his life, but the life of the woman he'd saved and the future he'd never dared to imagine for his daughter. Sometimes the moments that change everything look like nothing special at all. Sometimes heroism is just the simple choice to stop when everyone else keeps walking. Sometimes salvation comes not with trumpets and fanfare, but with trembling hands on a cold sidewalk and one man's refusal to let another human being die alone. Eleanor Whitmore's eyes opened to a world of white. White ceiling tiles, white walls, white sheets pulled up to her chin. The steady beep of monitors provided a rhythm she didn't remember falling asleep to. Her throat felt like sandpaper, her chest ached with every breath, and there was an IV line snaking into her left arm. She was alive. The realization hit her with unexpected force. She was alive, and she shouldn't be. "Ms. Whitmore?" A nurse appeared at her bedside, professional smile in place, but genuine relief in her eyes. "Welcome back. How are you feeling?" "Like I was hit by a truck," Eleanor managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happened?" "You had a cardiac event on Fifth Avenue last night, a severe arrhythmia that caused you to collapse. You're very lucky. Someone performed CPR until the ambulance arrived. The nurse checked the monitors, adjusted something on the IV. You were without a pulse for approximately 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Eleanor knew enough about medicine to understand what that meant. 3 minutes without oxygen to the brain. 3 minutes of being, for all practical purposes, dead. Who? The question came out more urgently than she'd intended. Who performed CPR? The nurse hesitated, consulting her tablet. I'm not sure. The EMT report says a bystander, but there's just basic contact information. Let me check with the doctor. She'll want to see you now that you're awake. Eleanor tried to sit up, but her body protested. Everything hurt. Her ribs especially. She'd probably have bruises from the chest compressions. Small price to pay for breathing. The next hour passed in a blur of examinations and questions. Dr. Rachel Morrison, her personal cardiologist, appeared with a grave expression that Eleanor had learned to read over the years. They'd been managing her heart condition, a congenital defect she'd been born with, for 2 decades now. It had never been this bad before. You're going to need surgery, Dr. Morrison said without preamble. She'd always appreciated that about Rachel. No sugarcoating, no false optimism. We can't keep managing this with medication. The arrhythmias are becoming too frequent, too severe. How soon? I'd like to schedule it for next week. You need a few days to stabilize, but we can't wait too long. Rachel pulled up a chair, her expression softening slightly. Eleanor, you died last night. If that stranger hadn't known CPR, if he'd hesitated even 30 seconds longer, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The stranger. Eleanor's mind kept circling back to him. She had flashes of memory, disconnected images like photographs scattered on a table. The cold sidewalk. Darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. Then hands on her chest, steady and sure. A voice cutting through the void. Come on, stay with me. She'd opened her eyes to see a face hovering above hers. A black man, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and a worried expression. He'd been saying something, telling her it was okay, that help was coming. His hands had been gentle when he touched her shoulder, despite the urgency of the moment. And then he'd vanished. I need to find him, Eleanor said suddenly. The man who saved me. Do we have his information? Rachel exchanged a look with the nurse. The EMTs took down basic contact details, but apparently he left the scene before they could get much. He seemed reluctant to be identified. What do we have? A name, Marcus Reed, and a phone number. Eleanor felt a surge of something she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, certainly, but also something deeper. This man, this Marcus Reed, had given her something no amount of money could buy. He'd given her a second chance at life. I want his information, she said. Everything we have. Over the next 2 days, as Eleanor recovered in her private suite at Mount Sinai, she became increasingly obsessed with finding Marcus Reed. The phone number the EMTs had collected went to voicemail, a generic greeting that told her nothing. She had her assistant, Jennifer, track down an address in the Bronx, but something made Eleanor hesitate before showing up at his door. What was she supposed to say? Thank you for saving my life. Here's a check. The very idea felt insulting, transactional, but she had to do something. The feeling was consuming her, this need to express gratitude, to understand who this man was and why he'd helped when hundreds of others had just watched. Jennifer, ever efficient, had pulled together a basic profile. Marcus Reed, 32 years old, widower, 1 daughter. He worked 2 jobs, warehouse work during the day and janitorial services at night. No criminal record, no social media presence beyond a dormant Facebook account that hadn't been updated in 3 years. The last post was a photo of him with a woman and a small child. The caption read, "My whole world, happy anniversary, T." Eleanor stared at that photo for a long time. The joy in Marcus's face was so pure, so unguarded. Whatever had happened in the 3 years since that photo, it had taken that lightness away. She'd seen his face on the sidewalk. It had been etched with determination and something else, something that looked like old pain. Ms. Whitmore? Jennifer's voice interrupted her thoughts. The board wants to know when you'll be back in the office. The Tanaka merger needs your signature, and the quarterly reports, Tell them I'll be out for at least 2 weeks, Eleanor said, making the decision in the moment, possibly longer depending on the surgery schedule. Jennifer's eyebrows rose slightly. Eleanor Whitmore didn't take time off. In 15 years of building her tech empire, she'd worked through vacations, holidays, even a broken ankle. The company was her life, her purpose, the thing that defined her, or it had been, until she died on a Manhattan sidewalk. Of course, Jennifer said smoothly. And the Marcus Reed situation? Would you like me to reach out, perhaps arrange a meeting? Eleanor considered this. Something told her that approaching this man through assistants and intermediaries would be exactly the wrong move. He'd left the scene without giving his full information. He clearly didn't want attention or recognition. No, she said finally. I'll handle this myself. The surgery was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Eleanor spent the days beforehand putting her affairs in order. Not because she expected to die, but because she'd already died once this week, and it had taught her to be prepared. She updated her will, reviewed her company's succession plan, and wrote letters to the few people in her life who mattered. It was a depressingly short list. Somewhere along the way to building a billion-dollar company, she'd traded human connection for market share. Her parents were dead, she had no siblings, and her relationships, romantic and otherwise, had all been sacrificed on the altar of success. She had money, she had power, she had influence. But when she'd been lying on that sidewalk dying, the only person who'd cared enough to stop had been a stranger working 2 jobs just to make ends meet. The irony wasn't lost on her. Sunday afternoon, Eleanor made a decision. She had Jennifer arrange for a car service, something discreet, nothing too flashy, and she gave the driver the Bronx address from Marcus Reed's file. The neighborhood was a stark contrast to Eleanor's penthouse in Tribeca. Apartment buildings with peeling paint and fire escapes zigzagging down their facades, corner stores with barred windows, children playing on sidewalks because the nearest park was 6 blocks away. Eleanor's driver pulled up in front of a 6-story walk-up. "This is the address, ma'am. Would you like me to wait?" "Yes, please." She climbed the stairs slowly, her chest still tender from the cardiac event. By the time she reached the 4th floor, she was breathing hard and questioning the wisdom of this expedition. Dr. Morrison would have a fit if she knew Eleanor was walking up 4 flights of stairs less than a week after nearly dying. Apartment 4C. Eleanor stood in front of the door for a long moment, suddenly uncertain. What was she doing here? What right did she have to intrude on this man's life? Before she could talk herself out of it, she knocked. Nothing. She waited, knocked again. Still nothing. "You looking for Marcus?" A voice made her turn. An elderly Asian woman stood in the doorway across the hall, eyeing Eleanor with open curiosity. "He's not home. Works Sundays." Oh. Eleanor felt foolish. Of course he was working. People who needed 2 jobs didn't get Sundays off. "Do you know when he'll be back?" The woman, Mrs. Chen, according to the nameplate on her door, studied Eleanor with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You from the hospital? About the bill? Because Marcus is good for it. He's just making payments." No, Eleanor interrupted quickly. "Nothing like that. How did she explain this? I'm someone he helped. I wanted to thank him." Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly. "That sounds like Marcus. Always helping. You know he saved a woman's life last week, right on 5th Avenue. "I know," Eleanor said quietly. "I was that woman." The old woman's eyes widened. She opened her door wider. Come in. Let me make tea. You need to rest. You look pale." Eleanor found herself ushered into Mrs. Chen's apartment, which was small but immaculate, filled with photographs and the smell of jasmine. She sat on a couch covered in protective plastic while Mrs. Chen bustled around the kitchen. "Marcus is a good man," Mrs. Chen said, setting down a teapot and 2 cups. "Since his wife died, he's been carrying the weight of the world. Works himself to the bone for that little girl." "His daughter?" "Ava. 8 years old, smart as a whip. She's the only thing that keeps him going some days, I think." Mrs. Chen poured the tea with steady hands. "He doesn't talk about it much, but I know. I see it in his eyes. That look of someone who's lost everything and is just trying to survive." Eleanor wrapped her hands around the warm cup, processing this information. What happened to his wife? Heart failure. Sudden, unexpected. Marcus tried to save her, did CPR just like they teach you, but it was too late by the time the ambulance came. Mrs. Chen shook her head sadly. I think that's why he helped you. He couldn't save Teresa, but maybe he could save someone else. The pieces clicked into place. The look on Marcus's face that night, the desperate determination, the refusal to give up. He hadn't just been performing a medical procedure. He'd been fighting his own demons, trying to rewrite an ending that had already been written. And this time, he'd succeeded. I need to thank him properly, Eleanor said, setting down her cup. Not just with words. I want to do something meaningful. Mrs. Chen looked at her shrewdly. You're the rich lady from TV, the tech company. Eleanor Whitmore, yes. Marcus won't take charity. Too proud. Too dignified. He'd rather work himself into an early grave than accept a handout. The old woman's voice was matter of fact. If you want to help him, you'll have to be clever about it. Eleanor smiled slightly. Clever was something she could do. She left her card with Mrs. Chen and asked her to have Marcus call when he got home. Then she went back to her car, her mind already working through possibilities. The call came 3 days later, early in the morning. Eleanor was in her hospital room. She'd been readmitted the day before for pre-surgery prep when her cell phone rang with an unknown number. Hello? Miss Whitmore? The voice was deep, cautious. This is Marcus Reed. Mrs. Chen said you stopped by. Eleanor sat up straighter, ignoring the pull of the IV in her arm. Mr. Reed, thank you for calling. I wanted to speak with you about what happened last week. I'm glad you're okay, he said simply. That's really all that matters. You saved my life. That matters quite a bit to me. A pause. I did what anyone would do. Except no one else did, Eleanor pointed out gently. There were hundreds of people on that street, Mr. Reed. You were the only one who stopped. Look, Ms. Whitmore, I appreciate you reaching out, but I really don't need any thanks or recognition or whatever. I'm just glad you're all right. She could hear the finality in his voice. He was about to hang up. Eleanor made a split-second decision. I'm having surgery tomorrow, she said quickly. A heart procedure. There are complications from the cardiac event, and I need to have them corrected. The doctor says if I'd been without oxygen any longer than I was, the damage would have been irreversible. You literally gave me the gift of life, Mr. Reed. The least you can do is let me say thank you properly. Another pause, longer this time. I hope your surgery goes well. Would you visit me after the surgery? Just once, so I can thank you face to face? Ms. Whitmore, Eleanor, please. She could hear him breathing, hear the wheels turning, finally. I work during visiting hours. I'll arrange for you to come in the evening, 8 o'clock. Please, Mr. Reed, it would mean a great deal to me. I have my daughter. Bring her. There's a children's area on the cardiac floor with books and games. She'll be well looked after. She was pushing too hard, she knew. But something about this man had gotten under her skin. She needed to understand him, needed to properly express what his actions had meant. Okay, Marcus said finally, reluctantly. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, but just for a few minutes. Thank you, Eleanor said, and meant it with her whole heart. The surgery went well, or so Dr. Morrison assured her when Eleanor woke up in recovery. The repair had been successful, the damage had been minimal, and her prognosis was excellent. Eleanor would need to make lifestyle changes, less stress, more rest, medication compliance. But she would live. She would live because Marcus Reed had refused to walk past a stranger in need. By 8 o'clock the following evening, Eleanor was propped up in her hospital bed, considerably more alert than she'd been that morning. Jennifer had brought her a proper nightgown, silk, not hospital cotton, and she'd managed to run a brush through her hair. She felt ridiculous, primping for a visitor like a teenager before a date, but she wanted to make a good impression. The knock on the door came precisely at 8. Come in, Eleanor called. The door opened and Marcus Reed stepped through, a little girl's hand clasped in his. He looked different than he had on the sidewalk, less frantic, more composed, but Eleanor recognized him immediately. Same kind eyes, same quiet strength in the set of his shoulders. "Mr. Reed," Eleanor said warmly, "thank you for coming, and you must be Ava." The girl, all big eyes and careful curiosity, pressed closer to her father's side. "Hi," she said quietly. "There's a playroom just down the hall," Eleanor told Marcus. "Jennifer, my assistant, is waiting there. Ava, would you like to see it? They have every book you can imagine and a whole section of art supplies." Ava looked up at her father, who hesitated, then nodded. "It's okay, baby. I'll be right here." A nurse appeared to escort Ava to the playroom, and then Eleanor and Marcus were alone. He stood awkwardly near the door, clearly uncomfortable, and Eleanor gestured to the chair beside her bed. "Please, sit. You make me nervous hovering by the door like you're planning an escape." A small smile tugged at his lips as he sat. "Not planning an escape, just not sure what I'm doing here." "You're here so I can say thank you," Eleanor said simply, "and because I wanted to see you again. I have these fractured memories of that night, your face, your voice, telling me to stay with you. I needed to put those pieces together with a real person." Marcus nodded slowly. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, tired, alive." She smiled. "That last one is entirely because of you." "I'm glad I was there," he said. "Glad I could help." "Why did you leave?" The question had been bothering Eleanor since she'd woken up in the ambulance. "The EMTs said you gave minimal information and disappeared before they could get more details." Marcus looked down at his hands. "I had to get home to Ava, and I didn't need recognition or thanks. It was just the right thing to do. Most people don't know CPR, and of those who do, most freeze in the moment." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "You didn't freeze. You acted. Mrs. Chen told me about your wife, about what happened." His jaw tightened. "Mrs. Chen talks too much. She cares about you, and she helped me understand something important." Eleanor chose her words carefully. "You saved me because you couldn't save her. That's a heavy burden to carry, Mr. Reed." "Marcus," he said quietly. "If we're being honest here, call me Marcus." "Marcus?" She tested the name. "I want to do something for you, something meaningful." "You don't owe me anything." "I owe you everything," Eleanor corrected, "but I know you won't accept money. Mrs. Chen was very clear on that point. So I'm going to offer you something else. A job." Marcus's head snapped up, surprise clear in his eyes. "A job?" "At Whitmore Technologies. We have openings in facilities management, operations, logistics. Ms. Whitmore, Eleanor, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not qualified for corporate work. I'm a warehouse worker and a janitor." "You're a man who makes split-second decisions under pressure, who stays calm in a crisis, who has the courage to act when everyone else freezes." Eleanor met his eyes steadily. "Those are exactly the qualities I look for in my employees. The specific skills can be taught. The character can't. I have a daughter. I can't afford to take a risk on a job I might fail at. You'll start at $60,000 a year with full benefits including health insurance, dental, vision, and a college savings plan for Ava. After 6 months, if you prove yourself, we'll discuss advancement." She watched the numbers register. 60,000 was probably more than both his current jobs combined. The health insurance alone would be life-changing for someone living paycheck to paycheck. But Marcus was shaking his head. "That's charity dressed up as employment." "It's an investment," Eleanor countered, "in someone who proved his worth when it mattered most. I'm not offering you this because I feel sorry for you, Marcus. I'm offering it because I think you have potential that's being wasted on jobs that don't challenge you or value you appropriately. You don't know anything about me. I know you saved my life when you had every reason to keep walking. You were late getting home to your daughter, late for your second job, and you still stopped. You did compressions for 3 minutes on a stranger whose expensive coat probably cost more than your monthly rent. You asked for nothing in return." Eleanor's voice was soft but firm. "That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, Manhattan sparkled with a million lights. "This is too much. It's too fast. I need to think." "Think all you want," Eleanor said. "The offer stands. Take a week. Take a month. But Marcus?" She waited until he turned to face her. Don't say no out of pride. If this were about charity, I'd have sent you a check and been done with it. This is about recognizing talent and potential. Please don't waste either one because you're afraid of accepting help. The door opened and Ava bounded in, her face lit with excitement. Daddy, they have the entire Chronicles of Narnia series. Can we check them out? The lady said we could. Marcus's expression softened immediately as he looked at his daughter. We'll see, baby. Ready to head home? Ava nodded, then turned to Eleanor with surprising boldness. Are you feeling better? Daddy said you were very sick. I'm much better now, thanks to your dad, Eleanor said warmly. He's very brave, you know. Ava beamed with pride. I know. He's the bravest daddy in the world. Something in Eleanor's chest tightened at the pure love and admiration in the child's voice. This little girl had already lost her mother. She needed her father healthy, happy, and present, not working himself to death on 2 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. Marcus took Ava's hand, heading for the door, then paused. Thank you for the offer. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. After they left, Eleanor lay back against her pillows, exhausted but oddly energized. Jennifer appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. Well? Her assistant asked. He'll take it, Eleanor said with confidence. He just needs time to convince himself it's not charity. And if he doesn't? Eleanor smiled. Then I'll find another way to help him. That man gave me my life back, Jennifer. I'm not going to let him waste his. Over the next week, as Eleanor recovered at home, she found herself thinking about Marcus Reed more than she should. She'd made the job offer genuinely. She did need good people, and his character spoke for itself. But she recognized there was something else driving her interest. For the first time in years, she'd met someone who wanted nothing from her. Someone who valued human life over personal advancement. Someone who'd seen her at her most vulnerable and had offered help without calculating the return on investment. In her world, that was revolutionary. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Marcus's voice was steady, but she could hear the nervousness underneath. Ms. Whitmore? I'd like to accept your offer, if it's still available. Eleanor felt a smile spread across her face. It is. When can you start? I need to give 2 weeks' notice at both jobs, so 3 weeks from Monday? Perfect. Jennifer will be in touch with all the details, paperwork, orientation schedule, everything you'll need. Eleanor paused. You're making the right decision, Marcus. I hope so, he said quietly. For Ava's sake. For both your sakes, Eleanor corrected. Welcome to Whitmore Technologies. After she hung up, Eleanor sat in her penthouse living room, looking out over the city that had almost claimed her life. Somewhere out there, in a cramped Bronx apartment, Marcus Reed was probably telling his daughter that things were about to change, that the struggle was about to get a little easier. Eleanor didn't know it yet, but she just made a decision that would reshape both their lives in ways neither of them could imagine. Sometimes gratitude opens doors, sometimes second chances come in unexpected packages, and sometimes when you stop long enough to save a stranger's life, you end up saving your own in the process. 3 weeks later, Marcus Reed would walk through the doors of Whitmore Technologies for his first day of work, nervous and uncertain and determined not to fail. He would have no way of knowing that within 6 months he'd be managing an entire department. No way of knowing that the woman whose life he'd saved would become one of the most important people in his world. No way of knowing that fate wasn't done testing them yet, that the skills he'd used to save Eleanor's life would be needed again under even more dramatic circumstances, and that this second intervention would cement a bond neither of them could deny. But that was still months away. For now, Marcus hung up the phone and pulled Ava into a hug, and let himself feel something he hadn't felt in 3 years: hope. Marcus's first day at Whitmore Technologies arrived with the kind of nervous energy that made sleep impossible. He'd been awake since 4 in the morning, trying on different combinations of the 2 dress shirts he owned, finally settling on the blue one that Teresa had bought him for a job interview 5 years ago. It still fit, barely, and he'd paired it with his only pair of dress pants and the shoes he wore to church on the rare Sundays he could attend. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, Marcus barely recognized himself. He looked like someone playing dress-up, pretending to be the kind of man who worked in a Manhattan high-rise instead of cleaning them. "You look handsome, Daddy," Ava said from the doorway, already dressed in her school uniform. Mrs. Chen would be walking her to the bus stop this morning, the first of many small adjustments to their new routine. "You think so?" Marcus adjusted his collar for the 10th time. "Mommy would think so too," Ava said seriously, and Marcus had to turn away, pretending to check something in the medicine cabinet so she wouldn't see the emotion in his eyes. The commute to Midtown was different in morning rush hour, packed shoulder to shoulder with other professionals heading to jobs that paid enough to justify the subway fare. Marcus clutched his worn messenger bag and tried not to think about all the ways he could fail at this. He'd never worked in an office, never used the kind of software they'd probably expect him to know, never navigated corporate politics or attended meetings or done any of the 1,000 things that people in his new tax bracket did every day. Whitmore Technologies occupied floors 15 through 22 of a gleaming glass tower on 6th Avenue. The lobby was all marble and chrome, with a reception desk that looked like it belonged in a spaceship. Marcus gave his name to the security guard, half expecting to be told there'd been a mistake, but the man just checked his list and handed over a temporary badge. "HR's on 15. Elevators are to your left." The elevator was glass-walled, offering a dizzying view of the atrium as it climbed. Marcus focused on his breathing, on keeping his expression neutral, on not looking like a man who was completely out of his depth. Jennifer Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, though they shared a surname, met him at reception with a warm smile and a tablet already loaded with his orientation schedule. She was younger than Eleanor, maybe late 20s, with the kind of polished efficiency that came from working closely with someone who demanded excellence. "Marcus, welcome. Ms. Whitmore wanted to greet you personally, but she's in back-to-back meetings all morning. You'll see her this afternoon." Jennifer gestured for him to follow her through a maze of glass-walled conference rooms and open-plan workspaces. "First, let's get you set up with IT, then HR has some paperwork, and then I'll show you to your department." The morning passed in a blur of forms and passwords and introductions to people whose names Marcus immediately forgot. His official title was Operations Coordinator for the Facilities Management Division, which sounded impressive but meant very little to him practically. His supervisor, a tired-looking man named Richard Palmer, explained that Marcus would be liaising between the various building services, maintenance teams, and management to ensure smooth daily operations. "Basically, when something breaks, you make sure it gets fixed," Richard said, showing Marcus to a desk in a cluster of 6 cubicles. "When there's a scheduling conflict, you resolve it. When vendors need access, you coordinate it. Think of yourself as the central nervous system of this building." Marcus nodded, taking notes on the small pad he'd brought from home. The desk had a computer with 2 monitors, a phone with more buttons than seemed necessary, and a small plant that looked like it was fighting for survival. "You've got warehouse experience, right?" Richard asked, scrolling through something on his screen. "Yes, sir. 5 years at Bronson Logistics." "Don't call me sir, it makes me feel old." "Richard is fine." The older man leaned back in his chair. "The warehouse background will help. You understand inventory, scheduling, coordination. This is just a fancier version of the same thing." Over the next few hours, Marcus met his team. There was Sarah, a woman in her 40s who'd been with the company for a decade and knew every system inside and out. James, fresh out of college and eager to prove himself. And Patricia, who was counting down the days to retirement and didn't bother hiding it. They were friendly enough, but Marcus could feel them sizing him up. The new guy who'd somehow landed this job without the usual corporate background. He could see the questions in their eyes, the speculation. By lunch, the rumors were probably already spreading. He ate alone in the cafeteria, a space that was nicer than most restaurants he'd been to, with fresh sushi and made-to-order salads and a coffee bar that offered 17 different preparation methods. Marcus got a simple turkey sandwich and found a table by the window, looking out over the city and wondering what Ava was eating for lunch at school. "Mind if I join you?" Marcus looked up to find Eleanor Whitmore standing there with a tray, and he nearly knocked over his water in his haste to stand. "Miss Whitmore, of course, please." Sit," she said with a slight smile, settling into the chair across from him. She looked different than she had in the hospital, stronger, healthier, dressed in a sharp navy suit that probably cost more than Marcus's first car. "How's your first day going?" "It's a lot to take in," Marcus admitted honestly. "Everyone's been welcoming, but I feel like I'm learning a new language." You are. Corporate speak is its own dialect. Eleanor took a bite of her salad. But you'll pick it up faster than you think. Richard tells me you've already identified a scheduling inefficiency in the maintenance rotations. Marcus felt heat creep up his neck. I just noticed that the cleaning crews and the HVAC maintenance were scheduled for the same floors at the same time. Seemed like it might cause conflicts. It does. It has been for months. You spotted it in 3 hours. Eleanor's eyes held approval. That's exactly the kind of fresh perspective we need. Don't ever apologize for seeing things others miss. They talked easily after that, Eleanor asking about Ava's adjustment to their new schedule. Marcus carefully not mentioning how overwhelming everything felt. She had a meeting at 1:30 and left with an encouragement to stop by her office before he went home, if he had time. The afternoon brought more training, more systems to learn, more names to remember. By 5 o'clock, Marcus's head was spinning and his dress shoes had rubbed blisters on both heels. But he'd survived. Day 1 was complete. He stopped by Eleanor's office as requested, finding her on a phone call with someone in Singapore, based on the video screen behind her desk. She gestured for him to wait, wrapping up the conversation with the kind of casual authority that came from years of being the most powerful person in any room. Sorry about that, she said, ending the call. Time zones make for interesting work days, so verdict on day 1? Overwhelming but good, Marcus said. I think I can do this. I know you can. Eleanor opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. Your first paycheck won't come for 2 weeks, and I know you gave notice at your other jobs. This is an advance against your salary, if you need it. Marcus took the envelope, feeling its weight. Ms. Whitmore, you've already done so much. Eleanor, she corrected gently. And this isn't charity. It's standard practice for new hires transitioning from other employment. Check with HR if you don't believe me. He opened the envelope to find a check for $3,000. $3,000 that would cover rent, groceries, new shoes for Ava, whose toes were cramping in her current pair. $3,000 that meant he could breathe for the first time in years. Thank you, he said, and the words felt inadequate. For all of this, the job, the advance, the chance. I won't let you down. I know you won't, Eleanor said simply. Now go home to your daughter. First days are exhausting. The first weeks blurred together in a steep learning curve that left Marcus mentally exhausted every night. But gradually, patterns emerged. He learned the rhythms of the building, the personalities of the vendors, the quirks of the various systems. He discovered he had a talent for anticipating problems before they became crises, for finding solutions that satisfied multiple parties, for staying calm when everything was falling apart. His team warmed to him as they realized he wasn't there to take credit for their work or throw his weight around. Sarah started inviting him to the weekly team lunches. James asked for advice on dealing with difficult contractors. Even Patricia, crusty and cynical, began to thaw. And Eleanor checked in regularly. Not obviously, not in a way that would undermine his authority or make the others resentful, but she was there. A question about how a project was going. A casual coffee in the cafeteria. A genuine interest in how he was adjusting. Marcus tried not to read too much into it. She was just being a good employer, making sure her investment was paying off. But sometimes he'd catch her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher, and he'd wonder if there was something more complicated happening beneath the surface of their professional relationship. 3 months in, Richard called Marcus into his office with news that made his heart sink. The company's expanding the facilities division, Richard said without preamble. We're taking over management for 2 more buildings. I need someone to head up the integration project. Marcus waited for the other shoe to drop. This was when they'd hire someone from outside, someone with more experience, and Marcus would go back to being just another coordinator. I'm recommending you for the position, Richard continued. Project manager, temporary promotion. If you succeed, and I think you will, it becomes permanent with a salary increase. Richard, I've only been here 3 months, and you've already proven yourself more capable than people who've been here 3 years. The older man's expression was serious. I'm not doing you a favor, Marcus. I'm doing what's best for the company. You see connections others miss. You solve problems creatively, and people trust you. That's not something you can teach. Marcus accepted because turning down the opportunity would be stupid and because he genuinely wanted to prove he could do it. The project consumed his next 2 months, coordinating with contractors, managing budgets, troubleshooting issues that cropped up daily. He worked late more nights than he liked, though never as late as he had at his old jobs, and Ava adjusted with the resilience of children who'd already survived harder things. Mrs. Chen still helped out, though now Marcus could pay her properly and cover her groceries when she refused payment. Ava's new school was better, closer, safer. They'd moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in a building with an elevator and heat that actually worked. Small changes, but they felt monumental. And slowly, gradually, Marcus began to believe that maybe this wasn't temporary. Maybe he really could build a life here. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday in October, 5 months after Marcus had started at Whitmore Technologies. He wasn't supposed to be there. Facilities managers didn't attend board meetings. But there was a presentation about the building expansion project, and Richard had asked him to be available in case there were technical questions. So Marcus sat in the small anteroom outside the main conference room, reviewing his notes and trying not to feel intimidated by the parade of executives and board members filing past. These were the people who decided the company's future with conversations over lunch that cost more than Marcus used to make in a week. Eleanor arrived last, as she always did, commanding attention simply by entering the room. She caught Marcus's eye and gave him a small, encouraging smile before disappearing into the conference room. The meeting had been going for about 40 minutes when Marcus heard the commotion. Raised voices, a chair scraping back, someone shouting Eleanor's name. Marcus was on his feet and through the door before conscious thought caught up with instinct. The scene that greeted him sent ice through his veins. Eleanor was collapsed against the conference table, her face pale and twisted with pain, one hand clutching her chest. A dozen people stood around her in various states of shock and uselessness, frozen the same way that crowd on Fifth Avenue had been frozen 6 months ago. "Someone call 911!" a board member was shouting, phone already in hand but making no move to actually help. Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides, his training and terrible experience taking over. "Eleanor? Eleanor, can you hear me?" Her eyes found his, wide with fear and recognition. She tried to speak but couldn't get the words out. "Everybody back," Marcus commanded, his voice cutting through the panic. "Give her space. You—" He pointed at Richard, who'd followed him in. "Make sure the ambulance is coming and meet them at the elevator. You—" He gestured at Jennifer, who looked terrified. "Get her medical information from her phone. She has a cardiac condition. They'll need to know the details." People scattered to follow his directions while Marcus focused entirely on Eleanor. Her breathing was labored, her pulse erratic under his fingers. This was different from the sidewalk. She was conscious, responsive, but it was clearly serious. "It's okay," he said quietly, keeping his voice calm even though his own heart was racing. "Help is coming. Just breathe with me, Eleanor. In and out. That's it." "Marcus," she managed, her hand gripping his arm with surprising strength. "Not again. I can't—" "You're not going anywhere," he told her firmly. "I didn't save your life 6 months ago just to lose you now. You're going to be fine." Dr. Morrison arrived before the ambulance. Her office was only 2 blocks away and Jennifer had called her directly. She took one look at Eleanor and started barking orders, pulling medication from her bag, checking vitals with practiced efficiency. "How long has she been symptomatic?" Dr. Morrison asked Marcus, recognizing him from the hospital. "Maybe 2 minutes before I got here. She's conscious and responsive, but her pulse is irregular and she's having chest pain." "Good. That's good." The doctor administered something through an injection that made Eleanor's breathing ease slightly. "The repair from last time looks like it's failing. She needs to get to the hospital immediately." The paramedics arrived and Marcus stepped back to let them work, but Eleanor's hand shot out and caught his. "Come with me," she said. And it wasn't a request. "Please." Marcus looked at Richard, who nodded. "Go. We'll handle things here." The ambulance ride was a blur of medical equipment and urgent voices. Marcus held Eleanor's hand the entire time, keeping up a steady stream of reassurance, even though his own mind was racing. This couldn't be happening again. She'd had surgery, had been recovering well, had been healthy and strong. But hearts were fragile things. He knew that better than anyone. At the hospital, they whisked Eleanor away immediately, and Marcus found himself in a waiting room that was becoming far too familiar. He called Mrs. Chen to explain he'd be late, called Richard to give an update, and then sat in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs and put his head in his hands. He'd been here before, had sat in rooms like this waiting for news about Teresa, watching doctors' faces as they delivered the kind of information that shattered worlds. "Mr. Reed?" Dr. Morrison appeared, still in her white coat, looking exhausted. "She's stable for now, but we need to do another surgery. Tomorrow morning, if we can get the OR scheduled. The previous repair has degraded faster than expected." "What does that mean for her recovery?" "If the surgery goes well, she should be fine, but there are always risks, especially with a second procedure." Dr. Morrison's expression softened. "She's asking for you. Room 412 if you want to see her before we start prep." Eleanor looked small in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors that beeped steadily. Her color was better than it had been in the conference room, but she still looked fragile in a way that made Marcus's chest ache. "Hey," he said softly, pulling a chair close to her bedside. "You really need to stop making a habit of this." She laughed weakly. "Terrible habit. I'm working on breaking it." Her hand found his. "Thank you. Again. You seem to keep showing up right when I need you most." "I'm just glad I was there." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Dr. Morrison says surgery tomorrow morning. You'll be fine." "Will you be here? After?" The vulnerability in her voice caught him off guard. "I know it's a lot to ask, and you have Ava and work." "I'll be here," Marcus promised. "Richard already said to take whatever time I need. And Ava's with Mrs. Chen. I'm not going anywhere." Eleanor's eyes shone with something that looked like tears. "I don't know what I did to deserve you walking into my life, but I'm grateful for it every single day. You didn't collapse on that sidewalk just to meet me, I hope." "Worst pickup strategy ever," she agreed, and they both laughed, the tension breaking slightly. A nurse came to prep Eleanor for the night, and Marcus reluctantly stood to leave, but Eleanor's hand tightened on his. "Marcus, I know this is probably not the time, but I need to say it in case—" She paused, gathering courage. "In case I don't get another chance. You've changed my life. Not just by saving it, but by showing me what really matters. Before I met you, I was so focused on the company, on success, on building an empire. But watching you with Ava, seeing how you work with your team, understanding what you've overcome, it made me realize I'd been measuring success with the wrong metrics." Marcus didn't know what to say to that. He settled for the truth. "You changed my life too. Gave me a chance when I'd stopped believing in chances. Showed me that maybe I could be more than just a man treading water." "You were always more than that," Eleanor said softly. "I just gave you a stage to prove it." The surgery was scheduled for 7 a.m. Marcus was there at 5:30, pacing the surgical waiting area with terrible coffee from the vending machine. Jennifer arrived at 6 with real coffee and pastries, settling in for what they both knew would be a long wait. "She cares about you," Jennifer said during one of the lulls. "More than just as an employee. You know that, right?" Marcus stared into his coffee cup. "I know she's grateful, and we've become friends, I think." "It's more than friendship." Jennifer's voice was gentle. "I've worked for Eleanor for 5 years. I've never seen her look at anyone the way she looks at you." "Jennifer, I'm not saying you have to do anything about it, and maybe this isn't the time for this conversation. But she's alone in there, Marcus. No family, no significant other, just employees and board members who care about her bottom line more than her heartbeat. You're the only person in her life who saw her as a human being worth saving before you knew who she was." The words sat heavy between them as they waited. Marcus thought about the past 5 months, about all the small moments he'd dismissed as professional courtesy or gratitude. The way Eleanor's face lit up when he entered a room. The casual touches that lasted just a beat too long. The conversations that drifted from work topics into personal territory. He'd been so focused on not being a charity case, on proving himself professionally, that he'd been blind to what was developing between them. Or maybe he'd seen it and chosen to ignore it, because getting involved with his boss was complicated enough without adding in the history they shared. But sitting in that waiting room watching the clock tick toward 7 a.m., Marcus had to admit the truth. Eleanor Whitmore had gotten under his skin. She was brilliant and driven and unexpectedly kind. She made him want to be better, to reach higher, to believe that maybe there was room in the world for a widowed father from the Bronx and a billionaire CEO to find common ground. The surgery took 6 hours. Dr. Morrison emerged looking cautiously optimistic but exhausted. She came through it well, the doctor reported. We had to replace the previous repair entirely, but the new work should hold. She'll need to stay in the hospital for at least a week this time, maybe longer, and her recovery will be slower. But she'll recover? Marcus asked, needing to hear it stated plainly. She'll recover, Dr. Morrison confirmed. Eleanor Whitmore is a fighter, and she has something to fight for now, which helps. They let Marcus see her briefly in recovery, though she was still unconscious from the anesthesia. He sat beside her bed, watching the monitors track her heartbeat, and made a decision. When she woke up, when she was strong enough, he was going to have a conversation he'd been avoiding, about what was growing between them, about the possibility of something more than gratitude and professional respect, about the terrifying, exhilarating prospect of letting someone pass the walls he'd built around his heart after Teresa died. Because life was short and fragile and uncertain. He'd learned that the hard way. And sometimes second chances came in unexpected packages offered by women who collapsed on sidewalks and then offered you the world. Sometimes the person you saved ended up saving you right back. Eleanor stirred slightly, her fingers twitching, and Marcus took her hand gently in his. She'd saved his life in ways she probably didn't even understand. Had pulled him out of a darkness he hadn't realized he'd been drowning in. Now it was his turn to be there for her, not as an employee, not as someone repaying a debt, but as someone who genuinely cared about her well-being, her happiness, her future, as someone who might, if he was honest with himself, be falling in love with her. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, sitting in that hospital room with Eleanor's hand in his and the steady beep of monitors tracking her heartbeat, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years: peace. Eleanor's eyes opened slowly, fighting against the fog of anesthesia. The first thing she saw was Marcus, slumped in the chair beside her bed, asleep with his head tilted at an angle that would leave his neck sore. His hand was still wrapped around hers, even in sleep, as if he was afraid she might slip away if he let go. The monitors beeped steadily, marking time in a rhythm that Eleanor had become far too familiar with. Her chest ached, her throat was dry, and every breath felt like work. But she was alive. Again. And once again, Marcus had been there. She squeezed his hand gently, watching as he startled awake, his eyes immediately finding hers with an intensity that made her heart rate spike on the monitor. "Hey," she whispered, her voice rough from the breathing tube they'd removed. "You're still here." "Where else would I be?" Marcus sat up straighter, reaching for the water pitcher without being asked. He held the straw to her lips, patient and careful. "How do you feel?" "Like someone cracked my chest open and rearranged my internal organs," Eleanor said after taking a small sip. "So, pretty much as expected. How long was I out?" "Surgery was 6 hours. You've been in recovery for another 3. Marcus glanced at his watch. "It's almost 5 p.m. Dr. Morrison said everything went well. The repair should hold this time." "Should," Eleanor repeated, catching the qualifier. "Not will." "She's optimistic. That's what matters." Marcus's thumb brushed across her knuckles in a gesture that felt both comforting and intimate. "You scared me today. When I walked into that conference room and saw you..." He stopped, his jaw tightening. "I couldn't go through that again. Couldn't lose someone else." The weight of those words settled between them. Someone else. Not just a boss, not just a friend. Someone who mattered in a way that went beyond professional courtesy or gratitude. "Marcus," Eleanor began, but he shook his head. "Not now. You need to rest, get your strength back. We can talk later when you're not hooked up to half a dozen machines." "I'm always hooked up to machines lately," Eleanor pointed out with a weak smile. "Might as well talk now." But a nurse bustled in before Marcus could respond, checking vitals and adjusting medications, and the moment passed. Dr. Morrison followed shortly after, conducting a thorough examination and declaring herself satisfied with Eleanor's progress. "You'll be here for at least a week, possibly longer," the doctor said firmly. "And when you leave, you're going on medical leave, minimum 3 months, Eleanor. I'm not negotiating this time." 3 months? The company... Has an excellent executive team that can manage without you. Your CFO has been running half the operations anyway. Dr. Morrison's expression brooked no argument. You've had 2 major cardiac events and 2 surgeries in 6 months. Your body needs time to heal properly, not just patch you up enough to get back to 16-hour workdays. Eleanor wanted to argue, but the exhaustion weighing down her limbs made the point for her. She was tired. Bone deep, soul tired in a way that had nothing to do with the surgery and everything to do with years of pushing herself past reasonable limits. Okay, she said quietly, and both Marcus and Dr. Morrison looked surprised. 3 months, but I want weekly updates on major decisions. We can arrange that, Dr. Morrison agreed. Marcus, make sure she actually rests. She's terrible at following medical advice. After the doctor left, Marcus raised an eyebrow. So that's my new job? Eleanor Whitmore's keeper? Apparently. Eleanor tried to shift into a more comfortable position and winced. Though I should warn you, I'm a difficult patient. I've handled difficult before. Marcus helped her adjust her pillows, his movements gentle. Ava had pneumonia when she was 5. 3 weeks of medicine schedules and breathing treatments, and a very cranky child who hated being stuck in bed. How is Ava? Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. She'd met Marcus's daughter a handful of times over the past months, brief encounters that had revealed a bright, observant child who clearly adored her father. Worried about you, actually. Mrs. Chen told her you were sick again, and she insisted on making you a get-well card. Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket, showing Eleanor a photo of a colorful drawing featuring stick figures and what appeared to be hearts. She wanted to come visit, but I told her hospitals aren't the most fun places for 8-year-olds. Eleanor felt something warm and unexpected bloom in her chest. She made me a card? She likes you, says you're the lady who gave Daddy a better job so we could get a bigger apartment, and she could have her own room. Marcus's smile was soft. She's not wrong. I'd love to see her when I'm out of here. Maybe she could come for dinner once I'm recovered enough to host properly. She'd like that. Marcus's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with a frown. I should call Mrs. Chen, let her know you're awake and doing well. She's been texting every hour for updates. You told your neighbor about me? Mrs. Chen was the one who helped me decide to take your job offer in the first place. She's invested in how things turn out. Marcus stood, stretching muscles that had been cramped too long. I'll be right outside. Call if you need anything. After he left, Eleanor lay in the quiet of her hospital room, processing everything that had happened. Twice now, Marcus had been there when her heart failed. Twice, he'd been the calm presence in the chaos, the one who knew what to do and did it without hesitation. It was beyond coincidence at this point. It felt like fate, though Eleanor had never been one to believe in such things. But maybe that was part of the problem. She'd spent so long believing only in what she could measure and control, in quarterly earnings and market share and technological innovation. She'd forgotten that some of the most important things in life couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet. Things like the comfort of a hand holding yours in a hospital room. Like the feeling of knowing someone would show up time and again simply because they cared. Like the possibility of connection with another person who saw past the money and the power to the human being underneath. The week in the hospital passed slowly, measured in small victories and frustrating setbacks. Eleanor's recovery was complicated by an infection that required additional antibiotics, by pain that medication couldn't quite touch, by the sheer exhaustion of healing from major surgery. But Marcus was there almost every day, usually in the evening after work. He'd bring Ava sometimes, and the little girl would chatter about school and friends and the new art class she was taking on Saturdays. Other times he came alone and they'd talk about everything and nothing, books they'd read, movies they'd seen, memories of people they'd lost. Marcus told her about Teresa, really told her for the first time, about how they'd met in college, both of them on scholarship, both of them working multiple jobs to afford the education that was supposed to change their lives, about falling in love over late-night study sessions and shared dreams of a future that felt impossibly bright, about the joy of Ava's birth and the terror of new parenthood and the simple happiness of building a life together. And about the night Teresa died, suddenly and without warning, leaving Marcus alone with a 5-year-old daughter, and grief so profound he wasn't sure he'd survive it. I failed her, Marcus said quietly one evening, staring at his hands. The CPR training they'd given us, I remembered it all, did everything right. But it wasn't enough. The aneurysm had already done too much damage. The paramedics told me there was nothing anyone could have done, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I'd just been faster, better, more... He stopped, his voice breaking slightly. Eleanor reached for his hand. You didn't fail her, Marcus. Sometimes hearts just stop, and there's nothing anyone can do to restart them. You know that intellectually, even if you can't quite make yourself believe it. Is that what you tell yourself? About your condition? Every day, Eleanor admitted. I was born with this defect. I've known since I was 12 that my heart might give out someday. I've spent 20 years being careful, following doctors' orders, taking medications, trying to do everything right, and it still happened anyway, twice. No amount of control or preparation could prevent it. So what do we do? Marcus asked. Those of us who've lost control, who've faced death and made it back, how do we live with that knowledge? Eleanor thought about this, about the months since that night on Fifth Avenue. I think we stop trying to control everything. We accept that life is fragile and uncertain, and we decide what really matters to us. Then we focus our energy there, instead of spreading ourselves thin trying to manage every possible outcome. And what matters to you? Now, after everything. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Eleanor could deflect, could give some safe answer about the company or her health, but she was tired of safe, tired of deflecting, tired of protecting herself from connection because it felt too risky, too vulnerable. This, she said simply. These conversations. The people who show up not because they want something from me, but because they actually care. Building something meaningful, not just profitable. She paused, gathering courage. You matter to me, Marcus. You and Ava. More than I expected, more than is probably wise given that you work for me and the whole situation is complicated. But there it is. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of her hand. It is complicated. You're my boss. You literally changed my entire life. There's a power dynamic that makes this messy. I know. And I haven't been with anyone since Teresa died. Haven't even wanted to be. The thought of letting someone that close again, of risking that kind of loss, he shook his head. It terrifies me. I know that too. Eleanor's heart was racing, the monitors probably tracking every nervous beat. But I also know that hiding from connection because we're afraid of loss isn't really living. It's just existing. And I'm tired of just existing, Marcus. I want more than that. What are you saying, Eleanor? I'm saying that when I get out of here, when I'm recovered and you've had time to think, I'd like to explore what this is between us. Not employer and employee, not savior and saved. Just two people who've been through hell and made it back, trying to figure out what comes next. She met his eyes steadily. But only if you want that too. I won't pressure you or make things uncomfortable at work if you don't. Your job is secure regardless. Marcus leaned forward, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek gently. I want that. I'm scared as hell, but I want it. Want to see where this goes, what we could be together. He kissed her then, soft and careful, mindful of her fragile state. It was nothing like the dramatic kisses in movies, no swelling music, no passionate urgency, just a gentle press of lips that felt like a promise, like the beginning of something both of them had been too afraid to reach for. When he pulled back, Eleanor was smiling despite the tears on her cheeks. That was nice. It was. Marcus wiped her tears away with his thumb. But Dr. Morrison would kill me if she knew I was elevating your heart rate right now. Worth it, Eleanor said, and they both laughed. The remaining days in the hospital felt different after that conversation. There was a lightness between them, an acknowledgement of possibility that made even the tedious aspects of recovery more bearable. They didn't hide their growing closeness from the nurses or Dr. Morrison, who observed the development with what looked like satisfaction. I've been telling her for years she needed more than work in her life, the doctor said to Marcus one morning when Eleanor was sleeping. I'm glad she finally listened. Richard visited with updates on the expansion project, which was proceeding smoothly under Marcus's careful management. The team had sent a giant bouquet and a card signed by everyone in the department, including Patricia, who'd written, "Get well soon, we need you back," in her scratchy handwriting. Jennifer brought Eleanor's laptop despite strict orders not to work, and Eleanor did manage to keep her checking of emails down to twice a day instead of every hour. The executive team sent video updates on major decisions, and Eleanor found that the company did, in fact, continue functioning without her constant oversight. It was both humbling and liberating. On Eleanor's 8th day in the hospital, Dr. Morrison declared her stable enough for discharge with strict conditions. Home care nurse 3 times a week, no stairs for the first 2 weeks, no driving for a month, absolutely no work stress. I want you focusing entirely on recovery. I don't have stairs in my apartment, Eleanor pointed out, but the building is 20 stories up. Elevators are fine, climbing is not. Doctor. Morrison made notes on her tablet. Do you have someone who can stay with you for the first week? You shouldn't be alone. Eleanor hesitated. She had staff, of course, and could hire a private nurse. But the thought of strangers in her space, of professional distance during such a vulnerable time, felt wrong. I could stay, Marcus offered quietly. He'd been there for the discharge discussion, having taken the day off work to help coordinate everything. I mean, if you're comfortable with that, Mrs. Chen can watch Ava, and your place is closer to the office anyway, just until you're steady on your feet. Marcus, that's too much to ask. You're not asking, I'm offering. His expression was firm. You were there for me when I needed it most, even though you didn't know me at all. Let me return the favor. So it was decided. Eleanor was discharged on a sunny October afternoon, riding down to the lobby in a wheelchair despite her protests that she could walk perfectly well. Marcus had arranged for a car service, and he helped her into the back seat with careful hands, as if she might break. Her penthouse felt both familiar and strange after 8 days away. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered sweeping views of Manhattan. The modern furniture was exactly as she'd left it, but somehow the space felt less like home than the hospital room had with Marcus sitting beside her. Guest room is down that hall, Eleanor told him, pointing. It has its own bathroom. Make yourself comfortable. Marcus set down the bag he'd brought. Apparently he'd gone home at some point to pack, and looked around the apartment with an expression Eleanor couldn't quite read. This is where you live. Yes. Is something wrong? No, it's just... He gestured at the expansive space, the expensive art on the walls, the view that probably cost more per month than most people's entire apartments. It's beautiful, but it feels lonely. Eleanor looked around, seeing her home through his eyes. He was right. It was beautiful and pristine and utterly devoid of the warmth that made a space feel lived in. No photos on the walls, no clutter on the surfaces, nothing personal except the books on the shelves. I suppose it is lonely, she admitted. I've never thought about it much. I'm barely here except to sleep. Well, that's about to change. Marcus moved to help her to the couch. Dr. Morrison wants you resting, which means actually being in your home instead of at the office. The first few days were an adjustment. Eleanor wasn't used to being taken care of, and Marcus wasn't used to her particular brand of stubborn independence. They bickered good-naturedly about things like whether she really needed to rest for a full hour in the afternoon, or if she could answer just a few work emails. Marcus won most of those arguments through the simple expedient of threatening to call Dr. Morrison. Ava came to visit on the 3rd day, bringing homemade cookies that she and Mrs. Chen had baked. The little girl was shy at first in the unfamiliar surroundings, but Eleanor drew her out with questions about school and art class, and soon Ava was chattering away comfortably. Your home is really big, Ava observed, looking around with wide eyes. Do you live here all by yourself? Usually, yes, though your dad is staying for a while to help me feel better. Because you're sick again. Ava's face grew serious. Daddy says your heart doesn't work right sometimes. That's true. But the doctors fixed it, and I'm getting stronger every day. Ava considered this, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a small stuffed bear, worn soft from years of love. This is Mr. Buttons. He helped me feel better when I had pneumonia. Maybe he can help you too. Eleanor felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Ava, I can't take your bear. It's just for a while, Ava said seriously. Until you're all better, then you can give him back. Marcus's eyes were suspiciously bright as he watched his daughter settle the stuffed bear in Eleanor's lap. That's very kind of you, sweetheart. Daddy says we should be kind to people who are hurting, Ava said simply. And Miss Eleanor is hurting, so she needs Mr. Buttons. After Ava left, Eleanor sat with the stuffed bear in her hands, thinking about the generosity of children and the way love could be expressed through the simplest gestures. When Marcus came back from walking Ava to Mrs. Chen's car, he found Eleanor crying quietly on the couch. "Hey, what's wrong?" He sat beside her, immediately concerned. "Are you in pain? Should I call the doctor?" "No, I'm fine. These are good tears, I think." Eleanor wiped her eyes, laughing a little at herself. "Your daughter just reminded me what kindness looks like. Real kindness, not the transactional kind I'm used to in business." Marcus put his arm around her shoulders, and Eleanor leaned into him, careful of her still healing chest. They sat like that for a long time, watching the sunset over Manhattan, neither of them needing to fill the silence with words. The days developed a rhythm. Mornings were for medications and gentle exercises the physical therapist had prescribed. Afternoons were for rest, with Eleanor propped up on the couch reading or watching movies she'd never had time for before. Evenings were for dinner. Marcus turned out to be a surprisingly good cook, and conversation that ranged from lighthearted to profound. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, their regrets. Marcus told her about growing up in Detroit, the son of a single mother who'd worked 3 jobs to keep them fed, about his determination to get an education and make something of himself, and the crushing disappointment of watching those dreams defer year after year as life got in the way. Eleanor shared her own story of being the driven, lonely child of wealthy parents who'd valued achievement over affection, about channeling her need for approval into academic and business success, building a company partly to prove she was worthy of love, even if she'd never quite received it from her family. "We're both trying to prove something," Marcus observed one evening. "You to parents who are gone, me to a wife who can't see what I've accomplished. Maybe that's why we understand each other." "Maybe," Eleanor agreed. "Or maybe we just recognize the same hunger in each other, the need to matter, to make a difference, to leave something behind that says we were here and our lives meant something." As the days passed, Eleanor grew stronger. The pain in her chest faded to a manageable ache. She could move around the apartment without getting winded, could handle basic tasks without needing help. The home care nurse declared herself impressed with Eleanor's progress and reduced her visits to twice a week. And through it all, the connection between Eleanor and Marcus deepened. Small touches became more frequent. A hand on the small of her back, fingers intertwined while watching television, goodnight kisses that lasted longer each time. They were building towards something, both of them knowing it but neither rushing the process. 2 weeks after Eleanor's discharge, Marcus's phone rang during dinner. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's Richard. I should probably take this." Eleanor nodded, watching as Marcus stepped into the other room. She could hear the murmur of conversation, but not the words. When he returned, his expression was troubled. "There's an issue at the office. A pipe burst in one of the new buildings we just took over, and it's flooding the basement. The night crew is panicking, and Richard needs someone there to coordinate the emergency response." "Then you should go," Eleanor said, though her heart sank at the thought of him leaving. "I don't want to leave you alone. Marcus, I'm fine. I can call the nurse if I need anything, and you're only a phone call away." She stood, moving to him and placing her hands on his chest. "This is your job, your responsibility. Go handle it." He kissed her forehead, then her lips, lingering for a moment. "I'll be back as soon as I can." After he left, the apartment felt cavernous and quiet. Eleanor tried to read but couldn't focus. She scrolled through her tablet, catching up on news and industry updates, but her mind kept wandering to Marcus dealing with the emergency at the building. Around midnight, her phone rang. Marcus's voice was strained when she answered. "It's under control now, but it's going to be a long night. We've got commercial water extraction crews coming, and I need to coordinate with the insurance adjusters and make sure the building is safe before we let anyone back in tomorrow." "Do what you need to do," Eleanor told him. "I'll be fine here." But after she hung up, restlessness drove her to the window. She stood looking out at the city lights, thinking about the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been alone in every way that mattered, measuring her worth by market capitalization and quarterly earnings. Now she had Marcus, had the tentative beginning of something that felt like family with him and Ava, had learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness and asking for help wasn't failure. She'd nearly died twice, and those brushes with death had paradoxically taught her how to live. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Miss you already. This is going to take hours. Try to get some sleep." Eleanor smiled, typing back, "Be safe. I'll be here when you get home." Home. When had her apartment become home to Marcus? When had it started feeling like home to her, now that he was here to share it? The questions didn't frighten her the way they might have once. Instead, they felt like promises of something good unfolding, something worth the risk of opening her carefully guarded heart. Eleanor settled on the couch with Mr. Buttons, the stuffed bear Ava had loaned her, and waited for Marcus to come back. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't alone with her thoughts and her fears. She had people who cared about her, who showed up when it mattered, who saw her as more than her accomplishments. She had Marcus, who'd saved her life twice now, once with CPR on a cold sidewalk, and again by showing her what living actually meant. Marcus returned to Eleanor's apartment just before dawn, exhausted and smelling of basement water and industrial cleaning solutions. He found her asleep on the couch, Mr. Buttons clutched to her chest, the television playing some old movie on mute. The sight made something in his chest constrict with an emotion he'd been trying not to name. Love. He was falling in love with her, had probably been falling since that moment in the hospital when she'd asked him to stay, when she'd been vulnerable enough to admit she needed someone. He knelt beside the couch, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on him with sleepy confusion that quickly cleared. "You're back," she murmured, her hand reaching for his face. "You look exhausted." "Long night, but it's handled." Marcus caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Why aren't you in bed?" "Couldn't sleep without knowing you were okay." Eleanor sat up slowly, making room for him on the couch. "Tell me what happened." So he did, keeping his voice low in the pre-dawn quiet, telling her about the burst pipe and the frantic hours of coordinating emergency crews and damage control. About making decisions in real time that would affect dozens of people and thousands of dollars, and somehow knowing exactly what needed to be done. "You're good at this," Eleanor said when he finished. "Crisis management, leadership under pressure. You've grown so much in 6 months, Marcus." "I had a good teacher, and a boss who believed I could do more than I thought I could." "You always could. You just needed the opportunity to prove it." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sky outside began to lighten. "Marcus, I've been thinking about something. When my medical leave is over, I want to restructure some things at the company." "Like what?" "Like creating a program for employees without traditional corporate backgrounds. People like you, smart, capable, hardworking, who just need a chance and some training. I've been so focused on recruiting from top universities and established companies that I've ignored a huge pool of talent." She paused. "You changed my perspective on a lot of things, made me realize that the metrics I was using to measure worth were incomplete." Marcus thought about this, about the Marcus Reed of 6 months ago who would never have gotten past the first screening interview at a company like Whitmore Technologies, about all the other talented people stuck in jobs that didn't challenge them simply because they didn't have the right credentials or connections. "That could change lives," he said quietly. "Not just individual lives, but families, communities." "I know, and I want you to help me design it." Eleanor lifted her head to look at him. "You understand both sides, what it's like to be overlooked and what skills actually matter in the workplace. Your input would be invaluable." "I'd be honored." Marcus meant it. The idea of creating pathways for others like him, of turning his own experience into something that could help people, resonated deeply. They talked for another hour, brainstorming ideas and possibilities as the sun rose over Manhattan. By the time Marcus finally convinced Eleanor to get some proper rest, they'd sketched out the framework for a program that could genuinely make a difference. Marcus showered and fell into bed in the guest room, but sleep was elusive. His mind kept circling back to Eleanor, to the life they were building in these quiet moments between crises. He thought about Ava, about how happy his daughter had been lately, how she'd started talking about Miss Eleanor with genuine affection. He thought about Teresa, about whether she would approve of him moving forward, of opening his heart to someone new. And he thought he knew the answer. Teresa had been many things, but selfish had never been one of them. She would want him happy, would want Ava to have someone else to love and be loved by. The thought brought both comfort and pain, the bittersweet ache of healing that would probably never fully disappear but was becoming manageable. The next weeks fell into a pattern that felt dangerously close to domestic bliss. Marcus would work during the day while Eleanor rested and slowly increased her activity level under Dr. Morrison's watchful eye. Evenings were for dinners that became collaborative efforts, for movies they'd both missed during years of working too hard, for conversations that revealed new layers of understanding. Ava became a regular fixture on weekends, bringing her homework to spread across Eleanor's dining table, chattering about her week while Eleanor listened with genuine interest. The little girl had a way of drawing Eleanor out, of making her laugh and play in ways that probably hadn't happened since Eleanor's own childhood. One Saturday afternoon, Marcus found them in Eleanor's office, which Eleanor wasn't technically supposed to be using, but had sneaked into anyway, with Ava perched on the desk chair that was far too big for her, pretending to be a CEO. "And then I'll tell everyone that we need to make computers that help kids learn better," Ava was saying seriously, her small hands gesturing the way she'd apparently seen Eleanor do during video calls. "Because some kids don't have good schools, and that's not fair." "That's an excellent business plan," Eleanor said with equal seriousness. "What else would your company do?" "Help daddies who work too hard find better jobs, like you did for my daddy." Marcus watched from the doorway, his heart full to bursting. This was what happiness looked like, he realized. Not the absence of pain or struggle, but the presence of people who mattered, moments that felt precious, connections that made the hard days bearable. Eleanor caught sight of him and smiled, the expression transforming her face into something radiant. "Your daughter is going to run the world someday." "I believe it," Marcus said, moving into the room. "But first, this CEO needs to finish her math homework." Ava groaned dramatically but climbed down from the chair, gathering her papers. Eleanor helped her organize the scattered worksheets, their heads bent together over a particularly tricky problem about fractions. Later, after Ava had fallen asleep on the couch during a movie, Marcus carried her to the guest room where they'd set up a small bed for her weekend visits. He tucked her in carefully, pressing a kiss to her forehead, and returned to find Eleanor watching him with an expression that made his breath catch. "What?" he asked, settling beside her. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am," Eleanor said softly. 6 months ago, I was dying on a sidewalk, alone in every way that mattered. Now I have this—" She gestured around them, encompassing not the expensive apartment, but the life they were building in it. "I have you and Ava, and I'm happier than I've been in years, maybe ever." Marcus took her hand, threading their fingers together. "I'm lucky too. You gave me more than a job, Eleanor. You gave me back my future, showed me that I could be more than just a man treading water." "We saved each other," Eleanor said. "That night on Fifth Avenue, you saved my life. But you've also saved me from a life that was all work and no meaning, from dying slowly of loneliness while thinking I had everything." Marcus leaned in, kissing her with the kind of tenderness that spoke of deep feeling and careful hope. When they pulled apart, Eleanor's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you," she whispered, the words tumbling out as if she couldn't hold them back any longer. "I know it's complicated and maybe too soon, and we should probably talk about the implications for work, but I love you, Marcus Reed. You and your beautiful daughter and the life you've brought into my world." Marcus felt his own eyes sting. "I love you too. I fought it for a while, told myself it was gratitude or proximity or anything but what it actually is. But I can't deny it anymore. I love you, Eleanor Whitmore, and that terrifies me." "Because of Teresa?" "Partly. Loving someone means risking loss, and I know how devastating that loss can be." Marcus touched her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "But also because loving you means believing I deserve this. Deserve happiness and partnership and a future that's bigger than just survival." "You deserve all of that and more," Eleanor said firmly. "You're one of the best men I've ever known, Marcus. Kind and brave and resilient. Any woman would be lucky to have you." "I only want one woman," Marcus said, and kissed her again. They made it official after that, though official looked different than either of them expected. Eleanor returned to work after her 3-month medical leave, but in a different capacity. She promoted her CFO to CEO and took on the role of executive chair, focusing on long-term strategy and special projects rather than day-to-day operations. The talent development program that she and Marcus had designed launched with Eleanor's full backing and Marcus as its director. It was a significant promotion that came with both excitement and skepticism from some quarters of the company. "People are saying you only got the job because you're dating the boss," Sarah told Marcus bluntly one day at lunch. The team had taken the news of Marcus and Eleanor's relationship with varying degrees of surprise and support. "Let them say it," Marcus replied calmly. "The program's success will speak for itself. And if anyone wants to actually look at my performance reviews and project outcomes, they'll see I earned this position." Sarah grinned. "Damn right you did. Just wanted to make sure you knew the gossip mill was churning. For what it's worth, I think you two are good together. She's happier, more human, and you smile more." The program started small, with 10 participants recruited from non-traditional backgrounds. Marcus threw himself into it with passionate dedication, designing curricula that balanced practical skills with confidence building, creating mentorship opportunities, and ensuring each participant received the support they needed to succeed. It was harder than running facilities management, but infinitely more rewarding. Watching people discover their potential, seeing them grow into roles they'd never imagined they could hold, reminded Marcus of his own transformation and made him want to pay it forward. Eleanor watched him flourish with quiet pride. She'd scaled back her own hours dramatically, making time for physical therapy and regular cardiology appointments, and, most importantly, for the people in her life who mattered. She had dinner with Marcus and Ava several times a week, attended Ava's art show at school, and slowly built the kind of personal life she'd neglected for years. Dr. Morrison declared herself amazed at the improvement in Eleanor's overall health. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Your stress markers are down, your heart function is stable, and you look happier than I've seen you in the decade I've been treating you." "I am happy," Eleanor admitted. "Turns out there's more to life than quarterly earnings reports." "Took you long enough to figure that out," the doctor said dryly. "But better late than never." 6 months after Eleanor's second surgery, on a spring evening when the city was just beginning to shake off winter's grip, Marcus took Eleanor and Ava to Central Park. They'd done this before, casual outings that felt wonderfully normal, but tonight felt different. There was a nervous energy to Marcus that Eleanor couldn't quite interpret. They had dinner at a small Italian restaurant Ava loved, then walked through the park as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Ava ran ahead, chasing pigeons and collecting interesting rocks, while Marcus and Eleanor walked hand in hand. "I've been thinking about something," Marcus said, his voice carrying a tremor that made Eleanor's heart skip. "About the future, and what I want it to look like." "Okay," Eleanor said carefully, watching his face. Marcus stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "When Teresa died, I thought my chance at happiness died with her. Thought I'd spend the rest of my life just going through the motions, trying to give Ava a good childhood while feeling empty inside." Eleanor squeezed his hand, understanding the courage it took for him to speak about this. "But then I met you," Marcus continued. "Or rather, you almost died on a sidewalk and gave me the chance to save someone when I couldn't save her. And everything changed. You gave me a job, yes, but you also gave me hope. Showed me that second chances are real, that life doesn't end just because the story takes an unexpected turn." "Marcus," Eleanor whispered, seeing where this was going and hardly daring to believe it. "I love you," he said simply. "I love the life we're building together. I love watching you with Ava, seeing how you've opened your heart to her. I love that we understand each other's scars and respect them instead of pretending they don't exist." He took a breath. "And I want to make this permanent. I want to build a future together, a real family." He pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple platinum band with a single diamond. "Eleanor Whitmore, will you marry me?" Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face, joy and disbelief and absolute certainty all tangled together. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, absolutely yes." Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then pulled her into a kiss that felt like coming home. When they broke apart, they found Ava watching them with wide eyes and a huge smile. "Does this mean Miss Eleanor is going to be my mommy?" the little girl asked, bouncing on her toes with excitement. Marcus looked at Eleanor, a question in his eyes. Eleanor knelt down to Ava's level, taking the child's small hands in hers. "I could never replace your mommy," Eleanor said gently. "She'll always be your mom, and that's important. But if you're okay with it, I'd love to be part of your family, to be someone else who loves you and takes care of you." Ava threw her arms around Eleanor's neck with the enthusiasm only children can manage. "I'd like that. Can I call you Eleanor, Mom?" Eleanor laughed through her tears, holding the little girl tight. "You can call me whatever feels right to you, sweetheart." Later that night, after Ava had fallen asleep at Eleanor's apartment, their apartment now really, since Marcus and Ava had been spending more nights there than at their own place, Marcus and Eleanor sat on the balcony, looking out over the city where their lives had intersected in the most unexpected way. "I never told you the whole story about that night," Marcus said quietly, "the night I saved you." Eleanor turned to look at him, seeing the shadows of old pain on his face. "I almost kept walking," he admitted. "I saw you on the ground, saw all those people standing around doing nothing, and my first instinct was to keep going. I was late, I was tired, and I told myself it wasn't my problem. Someone else would help." "But you didn't keep walking." "No, because right as I was about to walk past, I saw your hand. It was just lying there on the concrete, and it reminded me of Teresa's hand the night she died. And I thought about how she died alone in our apartment while Ava slept down the hall, how I'd been at work and hadn't been there to try to save her." Marcus's voice was rough with emotion. "I couldn't let someone else die alone like that. Couldn't be one of the people who just watched." Eleanor took his hand, understanding the weight of what he was sharing. "You turned your grief into compassion. That's remarkable, Marcus." "I don't know about remarkable, but I do know that saving you saved me too. Gave me purpose again, reminded me that I had something valuable to offer the world beyond just surviving." He looked at the ring on her finger, then back at her face. "You asked me once why I left that night without giving my full information. The truth is, I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of you being grateful. A feeling like I'd done something extraordinary when really I'd just done what anyone should do. Of owing you something, or you owing me something, and the whole thing becoming transactional." Marcus laughed softly. "I had no idea that you'd track me down anyway, that you'd see past the life-saving to the person underneath." "I saw someone worth knowing," Eleanor said. "Someone brave and kind and genuine in a world that doesn't value those qualities enough. I fell in love with you long before I admitted it to myself." "When did you know that you loved me?" Eleanor thought back through the months of her recovery, the slow building of trust and connection. "I think it was the day Ava brought me Mr. Buttons. Watching you with her, seeing the kind of father you are, the kind of man who raises a child to be generous and compassionate even when life has been hard. That's when I knew I wanted you in my life permanently." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of them processing the enormity of the commitment they'd just made. In the distance, the city hummed with life. Millions of people living their own stories, facing their own challenges, finding their own moments of grace. "Have you thought about the wedding?" Marcus asked eventually. "I know some people have big, elaborate plans, but..." "Small," Eleanor said immediately. "Just the people who matter. I don't need hundreds of guests who are really just business contacts. I want Ava there, and Mrs. Chen, and Jennifer, and your team from work. People who actually care about us as people." "That sounds perfect." Marcus pulled her closer, and Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder, feeling utterly content. The wedding took place 3 months later in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, surrounded by spring flowers and the small group of people who'd become their chosen family. Ava served as flower girl, taking her duties very seriously and beaming with pride. Mrs. Chen cried through the entire ceremony. Jennifer handled the logistics with her usual efficiency while also serving as Eleanor's maid of honor. Richard walked Eleanor down the aisle, having become something of a mentor and friend over the past year. "You're getting a good man," he told her quietly before they started down the path. "And he's getting someone who makes him believe in himself. That's a rare thing." The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They'd written their own vows, and when Marcus spoke about second chances and chosen family and love that heals, there wasn't a dry eye in the small gathering. Eleanor's vows focused on gratitude and transformation, about learning that vulnerability was strength and that the best things in life couldn't be controlled or planned. "You taught me how to live," she told Marcus, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Really live, not just exist. You showed me that success isn't measured in stock prices or market share, but in the people who show up when it matters, in the moments of connection that make everything else worthwhile." When they were pronounced married, Marcus kissed her thoroughly while Ava cheered and their small group of guests applauded. It wasn't the society wedding Eleanor could have had, with 500 guests and coverage in all the business publications. It was better. It was real. The reception was held in Eleanor's apartment, their apartment now since Marcus and Ava had officially moved in the week before. They'd transformed the space together, adding warmth and personality to what had been a beautiful but sterile showcase. Ava's artwork hung on the walls. Photos of Teresa had a place of honor on the bookshelf, because Eleanor understood that loving Marcus meant honoring the woman who'd come before her. Family pictures from the past year filled frames on every surface. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Eleanor found herself on the balcony again, this time with Ava beside her. The little girl, her daughter now, legally and in her heart, was fighting sleep but refusing to admit it. "Are you happy, Eleanor, Mom?" Ava asked, using the name she'd settled on after trying several variations. "Happier than I've ever been," Eleanor said honestly. "Are you happy, sweetheart?" Ava nodded sleepily. "Daddy smiles all the time now, and we have a real family again. I like having a family." Eleanor felt her chest tighten with love for this brave little girl who'd lost her mother too young, but had somehow maintained her capacity for joy and trust. "I like having a family too." Marcus joined them on the balcony, still in his wedding suit but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. He looked happy and relaxed in a way that Eleanor had come to cherish, so different from the exhausted, grief-worn man she'd first met in the hospital. "Ready for bed, baby girl?" he asked Ava, who nodded and let herself be picked up, resting her head on his shoulder, even though she was really getting too big to be carried. After Marcus settled Ava in her room, he returned to find Eleanor still on the balcony, looking out over the city that had brought them together in such an unlikely way. "Thinking about the past year?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "About how one moment can change everything," Eleanor said. "If I hadn't collapsed on that sidewalk, if you'd walked past like everyone else, if either of us had been even slightly different people, we never would have found each other." "Do you believe in fate?" Marcus asked. "That we were meant to meet?" Eleanor considered this. A year ago, she would have dismissed the idea as sentimental nonsense. But now, having lived through the improbable series of events that had brought them to this moment, she wasn't so sure. "I believe in choices," she said finally. "I believe you made a choice to help a stranger when no one else would. I believe I made a choice to find you and thank you instead of just sending a check. We kept making choices that brought us closer together, and here we are." "Here we are," Marcus echoed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Married, a family, building a life I never thought I'd have again." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights sparkle in the darkness. Somewhere out there were other people facing their own crises, their own crossroads, their own moments of decision. Eleanor thought about the talent development program, now in its second cohort with plans to expand nationally, about the lives being changed because Marcus had understood what it meant to need a second chance. "I want to do more," she said suddenly. "The program is good, but there's so much more we could do. Scholarship funds for kids like Ava, whose parents can't afford the best schools. Healthcare initiatives for people who can't afford their medications. Community centers in neighborhoods that have been overlooked." Marcus smiled against her hair, always thinking about the next project. "Not just projects, legacy. I want to build something that lasts beyond us, that helps people long after we're gone." She turned in his arms to face him. "I have more money than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. It should be doing good in the world, not just sitting in investment accounts." "Then let's make that happen," Marcus said. "Together, we'll build something meaningful." They talked late into the night, making plans and dreaming dreams, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way and had decided to spend their lives making the world a little bit better. It wasn't the life Eleanor had imagined for herself when she was building her empire, And it wasn't the life Marcus had dreamed of with Teresa, but it was their life, built from second chances and hard-won wisdom, and the kind of love that grows from mutual respect and shared values. 5 years later, the Reed Whitmore Foundation had become one of the most respected philanthropic organizations in the country, funding education initiatives, healthcare programs, and workforce development across dozens of cities. The talent development program had expanded to 15 companies and had helped hundreds of people transition into careers they'd never imagined possible. Ava was 13 now, confident and curious, splitting her time between advanced classes at one of the city's best schools and volunteering at the community center the foundation had built in her father's old neighborhood. She'd started a blog about social justice that had somehow gained thousands of followers, and she talked about studying public policy in college. Marcus had become the foundation's executive director, using his skills and experience to oversee programs that changed lives. He still thought about Teresa sometimes, still missed her in the quiet moments, but the grief had transformed into something gentler. He'd learned that loving Eleanor didn't diminish what he'd shared with Teresa. The heart was bigger than he'd imagined, with room for multiple loves, for honoring the past while building the future. Eleanor's health remained stable, managed with medication and regular monitoring. She'd had a few scares over the years, moments when her heart rhythm went wonky and everyone panicked, but she was still here, still fighting, still making the most of the second chance Marcus had given her that night on Fifth Avenue. They'd learned to balance work and family, to prioritize the moments that mattered, to say no to obligations that didn't align with their values. Their life wasn't perfect, no life ever was, but it was full and meaningful and built on a foundation of genuine love. On the 5-year anniversary of the night they'd met, Marcus and Eleanor returned to the spot on Fifth Avenue where it had all begun. It was a cold February night, not unlike that first night, and the sidewalk was crowded with people rushing past, focused on their own destinations. "This is where it happened," Marcus said quietly, standing on the exact spot where Eleanor had collapsed. "This is where everything changed." Eleanor slipped her hand into his, thinking about all the moments that had led from that desperate night to this moment of reflection. "You know what strikes me most about that night? All those people who walked past. I've thought about them over the years, wondered if they remember seeing someone collapse and doing nothing. Probably not. People are good at justifying inaction. But you didn't walk past. You stopped when stopping was inconvenient and scary and required you to face your own trauma." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "That's the definition of courage, Marcus. Not the absence of fear, but acting despite it." Marcus pulled her close, holding her in the middle of the bustling sidewalk while people flowed around them like water around stones. "I saved your life that night, but you saved mine too. Gave me a reason to believe in possibility again. Showed me that my story wasn't over. It was just taking an unexpected turn." They stood there for a long moment. Two people who'd been brought together by crisis and had chosen to build something beautiful from it. Then they turned and walked away hand in hand, heading home to the life they'd created, to the daughter waiting for them, to the work that gave their days meaning. Behind them, the city continued its relentless pulse, full of people facing their own moments of decision, their own crossroads between action and inaction, compassion and indifference, fear and courage. Some would walk past. Some would stop. And maybe, just maybe, one of those moments of stopping would change a life, would create a connection that would ripple out into the world, touching dozens or hundreds or thousands of other lives in ways that couldn't be predicted or measured, because that's what compassion does. It multiplies, it spreads. One act of kindness becomes a catalyst for others, and before you know it, the world is a little bit better than it was before. Marcus and Eleanor had learned this truth the hard way, through near-death experiences and grief and the slow rebuilding of broken lives. But they'd also learned that second chances are precious gifts, that love can grow in the unlikeliest places, and that sometimes the moments that break you open are the ones that let the light in. They'd learned that saving a life isn't always about CPR and emergency medicine. Sometimes it's about offering opportunity when someone needs it most. Sometimes it's about showing up, day after day, and being present for the people who matter. Sometimes it's about building something bigger than yourself that will outlast you and help people you'll never meet. But most importantly, they'd learned that the best way to honor a second chance is to use it to give others second chances too. to turn gratitude into action, privilege into purpose, and personal transformation into collective good. That was their legacy. Not the money Eleanor had made or the programs Marcus had built, but the lives they'd touched, the possibilities they'd opened, the hope they'd sparked in people who'd stopped believing in hope. And it had all started with one man's refusal to walk past a stranger in need, one woman's determination to thank her Savior, and two broken hearts that had somehow found a way to heal each other. Sometimes the best stories don't have tidy endings. They have new beginnings instead, moments when everything changes and life suddenly becomes something richer and fuller than you imagined possible. Marcus and Eleanor had found their new beginning on a cold sidewalk in Manhattan, and they'd spent every day since making the most of it. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.